Did you know that most Americans consider themselves to be part of the middle class, whether they are or not? In fact, one survey conducted by the Huffington Post revealed that 88% of those polled placed themselves in the middle class. In reality, though, the middle class is shrinking. In fact, according to the Pew Research Center, between 2008 and last year, the middle class dropped from 53% to 44% of the population. As Rekha Koshar, the associate director of the research center at Pew, put it, growth is either at the very lowest end or the very highest end of the spectrum. The middle is shrinking. Now, economists and sociologists will tell you that defining the middle class and how to go about doing that is hotly debated. Some base their definitions of class on income, how much money is received in a year. Some base it on consumption, how much money is spent in a year. Some on demographic factors, including race and education. And others base their definition of middle class, upper class, and lower class on total accumulated wealth. But the reality is clear. However it is defined, however we understand it, most of us see ourselves as middle class. And there's nothing wrong with that, I suppose, except for the fact that it can tend to blind us to reality. Not only the reality of our own lives, but the lives of those around us. Not so much those we would consider to be part of the upper class, but the working poor, the welfare moms, the financially insecure. We forget, oh so easily, that not everyone has the relative security that we enjoy. As New Testament scholar Fame Perkins writes, isolated in middle-class comfort and privilege, we can become complacent. I'm convinced that while Perkins is right and that what he says is true, it is not because we are inherently bad people. Rather, in our personal, understandable desire for stability, safety, and security, we have often erected fences and boundaries to protect us so that we don't have to see poverty. We may grumble about having a $6 toll on the causeway, but if we're honest, at some level, we feel more comfortable because of it. We don't have to worry about those kind on our beaches. It keeps certain folks at bay. We might not like the inconveniences of passing through gated entrances where we live, but secretly, we may be glad that they shelter us from those who have not. Such, I suspect, is the case with the rich man in today's scripture lesson from Luke. It is one of the longer parables told by Jesus, And if we are honest, it hits us right where most of us live and makes us a bit uncomfortable. It tells of two men, one rich, who is unnamed in the parable, though he is often referred to by ancient commentators as Dives, the Latin word meaning rich, and the other man who is poor. I don't think it is insignificant that he is named by Jesus in this parable. He's called Lazarus, not to be mistaken with the brother of Mary and Martha, who's talked about in John. This is a fictional Lazarus. The rich man is described in quite a bit of detail. He wears the finest clothes made of linen and purple cloth, the garments in that day of the well-to-do and the powerful, Ralph Lauren golf shirts, Hugo Boss suits, Vineyard Vine ties. He's well-fed, no doubt consuming the best food available, lobster bisque, wild salmon, and T-bone steaks. Okay, not the lobster. He keeps kosher after all, but organic, non-GMO kosher. And he lives within some sort of compound, a gated community, if you will. And he lacks for nothing. Right outside the gates, however, there is a poor man named Lazarus who takes up his place every day. He is sick with some unnamed illness that causes his body to be covered with sores and blisters. And the stray dogs lick at him all day long. As he sits on his bit of greasy cardboard, he waits for that time of day with great eagerness when the rich man's table is cleaned off and the scraps are thrown out for the dogs. It is a wretched existence. And one day, disease and starvation catch up with him, and he dies. By an odd coincidence, the rich man dies the same day. Perhaps he chokes on a chicken bone, or his high blood pressure and cholesterol levels finally catch up with him. Whatever the case, he passes from this life to the next. We're told he's given a proper burial, and his family leaves the graveside to argue over his will. Okay, true, Jesus doesn't say the stuff about the will, but who knows? That's probably what happened. But no one bothers to bury poor Lazarus. A great insult in that Jewish culture. We aren't told, but perhaps his body is carted off by the street cleaning crew and thrown on a refuse heap. A sad end indeed. But wait, there is a hopeful note in the story. For Lazarus' soul is carried off to heaven by angels, where he is ushered into the waiting arms of the great patriarch Abraham. Meanwhile, the rich man finds himself on the wrong side of the great divide, burning up in the fires of hell. As he looks across the fiery chasm, he sees Lazarus hanging out and comfortable with Abraham. He never really had much to do with the poor man while they were both still living, but somewhere he'd heard somebody mention his name, probably a guard at the gate. "Father Abraham," he calls out, "it's hotter than blazes down here. Please send down Lazarus with a cold drink, maybe a glass of Perrier or at least a frozen margarita." Abraham shakes his head. "You had all the good stuff back then," he says. "Now it's Lazarus's turn." The rich man tries again. "Well, at least send him to earth to give my 5 brothers a heads up." They don't need this poor fellow, says Abraham. They've got the Bible to warn them. They've got the writings of Moses and the prophets. "Oh, but Abraham, if Lazarus showed up from the dead, surely they'd pay attention." "You're kidding, right?" says Abraham. "It's already right there in front of them, and they're just not paying attention. Why would a ghost change their minds?" Same as it was for you, Dives. It was all right outside your gate, and you paid it no heed. The poverty, the sickness, the despair, it was right there. How could you have missed it? He was right there, Lazarus, and you didn't even see him, much do anything to help him out. Now, please, pay very close attention right now. Because if you don't, you won't be able to apply this to yourself, and you and I need to be able to do that. Jesus doesn't paint the rich man, Dives, as an evil man. As one scholar writes, the rich man does not persecute Lazarus, nor does he refuse him food, nor does he sponsor legislation to rid the gates of poor people like Lazarus. No. In his comfort, in his safety, in his security, the rich man doesn't even see Lazarus. Yes, he may have noticed that there was some ragged-looking homeless fellow on the street in front of his house. He may have heard through the grapevine that his name was Lazarus or Larry or something like that. But he doesn't really see him as a fellow human being. He doesn't stop to speak to him or to find out what he needs or to ask, "How are you doing?" He is, for all intents and purposes, blind to his very presence. And friends, quite frankly, that's my own fear. My fear for myself and my fear for you. We're not bad people. In fact, we do undertake some efforts to aid the descendants of Lazarus who live just outside our gates. Efforts we must continue. We bring in food for the pantries. We donate to Harry Chapin and other agencies who work with the poor. Some of us may even take to letter writing in an attempt to influence our legislators so that they might bring about changes to benefit the poor. But do we really see such folks? Do we see just how desperate their lives can be? Do we understand that the person who waits at our table has children at home who may go hungry? Do we understand that the people who mop our floors may themselves live in hovels that no person should live in? Do we realize that those who gently care for our sick are hardly paid enough to be able to afford medical care for themselves. Do we realize that something as simple as a bad case of the flu or a rundown car battery can lead to the loss of transportation, which can lead to the loss of a job, which can lead to eviction? Do we comprehend, really comprehend, that those who are poor have dreams as well? And we are called to do more than simply throw them the figurative scraps off our tables. I recently read an article about a company that is rehabbing apartment complexes in New York. In reflecting on some of their concerns, one of the residents living in one of those apartments that was being brought up to snuff said, "We aren't asking for chandeliers, just basic things. We're regular people, poor people, who want to live decently." Who doesn't want to live decently? I don't know about you. I'm not here to judge. But I know I find it personally very, very easy to slip into the isolation of my middle class life and become very complacent. Deep down, I know poverty is out there. I have studied that reality more than most. But sometimes I forget. And frankly, sometimes I want to forget. I don't want to have to think about it. I don't want some preacher telling me it exists. But Jesus suggests we must always remember those who are right outside the gates. And not just remember, but find ways to make a difference. Yes, we must keep up those food pantry donations and mission gifts and letters to legislators, but we must also seek to do more. We must seek to know those outside our gates by name. And then listening, really listening to their needs, their hopes and their dreams. We must humbly ask them, how can I help? How can we help? What can we do? Like the gulf between Lazarus and the rich man, the chasm between us and those who are impoverished is often very wide. But we can and we must help bridge it. Indeed, we must work for the day when there is no one outside the gates, because there no longer are any gates.